Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest. But before I do that, here's a quote that I just think is perfect for this episode. I was ashamed of myself when I realized life was a costume party and I attended with my real face. Franz Kafka, the one and only Scott Rutkay. The man, the myth, the advisor, the listener, the challenger, the connoisseur of culture is back in action. Hold on, there's more. Thanks for coming back, Scott.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate it. I thought you were going to go the whole 45. I could have just sat here and listened to the accolades come in. But thank you. And I appreciate it. Completely undeserved. All of those.
I'm curious, I guess, why, I don't know. Why do you think I picked this quote?
It's why would you pick this quote? If I just sort of think about, how many faces does someone wear during the day? And how many roles does someone take during the day? I wake up as a husband, I walk down the hall and I'm a father. I get in my car and I'm a leader. I go somewhere and perhaps, I'm something else there as well. And to sort of understand how scary it can be to sort of take off all those faces and just be me. What's the separation behind all of these faces and then what I believe I am? And that's scary, right? I mean, that's I know how to do all the things I just told you. I don't know if I know how to be me.
Are you familiar with Kafka? You ever, because you did have a background.
Obviously Metamorphosis as a child. So yeah, I mean, if you talk about faces there, I mean, right? That's that manifest.
I can't get that bug out of my head.
Yeah. Yeah. But
for those that don't know, what's the general theme of that book? The Metamorphosis, right?
Yeah. So Kafka's main character wakes up as a cockroach. Right? I mean, he wakes up and
when you hear it, it sounds hilarious.
But like full-sized to a human and a cockroach, if I remember correctly. I mean, you're putting me on the spot here. But what it discusses is sort of his relationship with his environment around him, what he feels, what that actually represents for him. And it really sort of contemplates, what it means to be human, what it means to be a person, what it means to be yourself. And I remember it, obviously high school was a long time in the past. I hope my daughter's probably closer to reading it than I am right now. Yeah.
I'm thinking about that book. I'm thinking about the premise. I'm thinking about the last few months is at some level what's going on in the economy today. Us waking up and being the roach. Maybe I could be totally misinterpreting the book, but like my take on it is there's this, they wake up and now I'm seeing myself for what I really am. I don't know. Curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, the direction I thought you were going to go with that is sort of the feeling of waking up, feeling powerless, feeling small, feeling, insignificant in times like this where there is economic uncertainty.
Ooh, that's good.
If you're to believe sort of what you see online, we're all 30 seconds away from the world exploding anyway. And there's such panic and there's such fear mongering by so many different forces. You have to really sort of overcome that on a day-to-day basis. So, it might be the feeling that people wake up and feel, as I said, just sort of completely powerless against, very strong destructive forces, and how insignificant you could feel based on that.
I think that's what In the last 6 months, I feel like I've done more than I did in 2 years. Like the anxiety. I remember the earlier, like when things started to shift, I was telling people, because maybe that's why, and I feel like I just talk about this with you because when I read this, I was ashamed of myself when I realized life was a costume party and I intended with my real face. I recognized myself telling people that I came across, yeah, things are definitely down. And it was like you could see them go pale, kind of.
Yeah.
I was like feeling like, oh, I'm being uninvited to the costume party. And then I realized, all right, well, the difference in anxiety and excitement is really, do I have a plan and am I executing it?
Yeah.
I haven't changed. Now I'm saying excitement. When I was saying anxiety, I was all right with it. But I was like starting to feel alienated from other people. I'm curious when I was going into those interactions, just telling the truth. And I wasn't saying the sky was falling. I actually didn't feel like the sky was falling. I was just telling the truth and can kind of see the eyes glaze over and the blood rush out. And then, maybe people were misinterpreting what exactly I was saying. I'm curious what your thoughts are on
Yeah,
that
I mean,
drama.
So the costume party piece could also mean this in terms of what you're saying. If you think about the situation that we're in relative to economics, there's some negative, there's a lot of negative out there right now. And are people faking it? Is Kafka saying, I'm being invited to a party, everybody's dressed up, they're faking it. They're faking it. I'm showing up and I'm true to myself. I'm real. I'm trying to, tell the truth of what's going on. And is that the rejection? Am I being rejected because of that? And that's a real fear. I mean, in any industry, right? When times are tough, the first bunch of people you talk to, they're having a great year. Really? How's that? I mean, really? How's that possible? Oh yeah, everything's great. And you don't necessarily get bad news until everybody's talking about the bad news. And then everybody sort of then collects around the bad news, right? Now everybody's doing poorly, and that's the common story. But in the beginning, everybody's doing great and everything's great and the world's on fire, but we're all great here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so minus the bullshit, what can we do to succeed right now? Thoughts?
Well, I mean, it depends. It depends what your definition of success is. If your definition of success is being at the costume party, then do what everybody else is doing and lie, and sort of, pretend like nothing's wrong. But if you want to be your genuine self, the onus is on you. Nobody's going to tell you to act a certain way. The onus is on you to speak plainly and speak truthfully as much as you can.
I'm curious. I want your feedback on that idea of, I realized that I'm going to stop saying that because I do have a plan. We as in we do have a plan. It's I and we are working. We are keeping our word. We're kind of going into the burning building, like running in like a firefighters. So I started telling people I'm excited. But then I thought, because the last thing I want to do is self-deceive.
Right.
Because I'd like to not be the people holding the bag at the end.
But I mean,
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, as far as self-deceiving, I've always found that if I wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, I'm going to have a shitty day, no matter what happens in my life, I'm having a shitty day. And right, if you walk up and say, I'm awesome and I'm going to do awesome things today, that doesn't change what's going on in your world, perhaps, but it just puts you in the right mindset to be looking for that awesome day, be looking for the successes. So, I don't necessarily think it's me lying to myself. I actually think it's being most genuine and saying, at best, I'd love this to be an awesome day. But to your point, how many people do you talk to? You give them a call and you're not watching them, right? So, because that's important. You're not getting any visual cues. How's your day going? Awesome. I mean, right away, what the tone of that awesome is. It's either sarcastic or it's the best day of their life. That's the inauthentic part, right? That's when people just say things just to say them, repeat things just like it sounds like it's right, but immediately through either visual cues or audio cues what's really going on.
How important do you think actions are in that matrix?
Well, I mean, it's
what we're doing, what we're actually doing, what we're not doing.
Sure. I mean, that's the most important thing, right? Is the doing. If the saying means nothing. If I tell you I'm going to do a lot of things and I don't do any of them, what kind of person am I? If I say I'm going to do 10 things and I do 8 of them and I gave it a shot, boy, that's a whole different set of circumstances, right? I set a goal. I tried my best. I got to where I got to. That's a hell of a lot better than not doing anything at all and saying I did. So yeah, I mean, you couldn't be around people who say and not do. Not for any length of period of time.
Yeah, well, I'm curious, like, what leads people to put up with those that don't, in your estimation?
Well, I mean, necessity, perhaps. I mean, there's you could be forced to. Look, there's many situations where people are in your lives not necessarily based on what you've done. They could be people on your team, they could be coworkers, they could be family members who say a lot of things and don't do. I mean, those are the people you're stuck with, right? They happen to have the same last name, and those they're with you forever. So, I can't leave, as I can leave a job and go work with different people. I can't leave a family and go live with another family. I've tried. It's not, it changed the locks after a while.
What do you think that the audience needs to understand from this conversation?
I mean, relative to this piece, I govern my life by doing what I say I'm going to do. And the people around me trust that if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And that trust is incredibly important to me.
Why?
Well, I mean, I think that, aside from wanting to be trusted, I also want to be believed. Right? I mean, that's the other thing is I am a, I'm an expert in the fields that I'm involved in, and I want to be trusted that if you have a problem and it is, so it's something that I can help you out with, you call and you understand that I can be helpful to solve that, whatever you're involved in.
What do you get from that?
What do I get from that? I think it really gets to at, my heart. I do like the process of solving a problem. I like the detective work. I like researching, what's causing it. I like to find root causes. I like to sort of, burrow my nose in the dirt and sort of learn everything I can about something new. Now, that's the most exciting, in my business, a lot of transactions are very similar, but each one is unique in its own way. I mean, there are different sets of circumstances with every transaction. And when you find something that you haven't seen, especially being in the, in this career for a long time, it's exciting. It's exciting to learn something new. That's to be able to pass that information along to other people is also exciting.
What do you think about people that aren't curious? What are they missing out on?
I mean, success in whatever they're looking to succeed in. I mean, I tell people that I'm not born with this information. I didn't, you just don't know it. You have to learn all of, everything you learn, relative to something specialized. You're never going to be successful thinking you know how to do it yourself. You can find all the answers yourself. Just there's people who have completely different experiences from me, and to not tap into those people is a life lost.
We were talking about Kafka earlier, Metamorphosis. What books have impacted you throughout your life?
you know, that's sort of the one of the end questions to a podcast. I listen quite a bit. Alan Alda has a science-driven podcast, and he asks all of his guests, what book changed your life? So I've thought about that question. Wow. I used to think, when I was very young, Bret Easton Ellis came out with a book called American Psycho. And just randomly, my father's company was mentioned in the book 2 times.
Really?
Yeah. And so the whole conceit of the book is that he's a New York Wall Street guy in the 80s. And he describes at great detail every single thing that people were wearing. And my father manufactured shirts.
Wow.
In the course of the book, 2 people were wearing a shirt from his company. And so as a kid, I that sort of brought me some local celebrity, which was very odd. And
wait, American Psycho is that movie with Christian Bale?
Yeah, Christian Bale. Yeah. And it was way more controversial as a book, way more controversial. So Bret Easton Ellis came out with Less Than Zero, which he wrote in college, which was a monumental book about the 80s, LA living in
Never
the
heard
80s.
of it.
Less Than Zero. Oh, you have to read more. See, we've had this discussion. You have to read more fiction. You have to read more fiction.
Please continue. This is gold.
So it was a very wealthy kid coming home on a winter break in Los Angeles, and sort of the emptiness of LA. It really described sort of what growing up in Los Angeles was at that time. But then a book later on was American Psycho, and it was it hits you hard in a lot of different ways. It's a very interesting book. He was writing it as a satire, and I'm not 100% sure that people understood that it was a satire. I'm not 100% sure people understand the movie was supposed to be a satire.
Well, isn't it a satire on corporate greed or something?
Sure, but if you're
just maybe capitalism,
if your purpose, and also the emptiness of searching for material things, and so many different things. There's a scene in the book that I don't believe made the movie. It might have, but it didn't. It goes on for pages about which bottled water tastes best. And when someone at the end of the conversation says that they don't like Evian because it's too sweet, there was like a pensive, like people, there was a thoughtful moment after that statement. People like paused and were thoughtful about that. Yes, it is too sweet. You're right. And how empty and vapid is that sort of thought? But in a sense, also beautiful, right? I mean, also beautifully, like that's a beautiful thought that I'm sure that conversation happened thousands of times.
Like the meaningful meaninglessness.
Right.
It's like the subjective projection or of us in the brands or something like.
Right. How
we start to trick ourselves into thinking as value.
We're talking about water, right? We're not talking about something that theoretically has one. Pepsi's different from Coca-Cola. They have 2 completely different tastes. The conceit that all waters taste different is such an interesting thought, right? And that's it really is.
Goes back to Kafka.
Right. So what book changed my life? So when I was a kid, maybe a little dorky, maybe not not a lot going for me, sort of at that time. And now local celebrity in a book that my friends were reading, my contemporaries were reading. And by the way, I'm starting to wear shirts with like the logo on it in big letters. And I mean, so I know it's a silly answer. First thing that came to mind, and as someone younger, it was sort of interesting to have that. Lasted for a very short period of time, but it was very interesting.
Well, thank you for that, because I didn't know that he had a book in that movie, which is sad. And now I would much rather read the book than even watch that movie.
So Less Than Zero, Rules of Attraction, and American Psycho. They did make a sequel to American Psycho. Pay no attention to that. The movie. That wasn't that. I don't know what that was based on, but it certainly wasn't based on the original book.
And how about outside of, familial acclaim, any fiction or nonfiction literature that moved you in another direction? Had you not read it, you may not even be doing what you're doing today, or
when I first read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, that was sort of, for me, that was, it took me in a completely different direction as far as what I was interested in, and that was fantasy. And that took me a lot of places. And if you're sort of used to so I was living, in the city with my father quite a bit, to be able to read about an adventure that takes someone over, mountains, fields, plain, completely different than a city was, that just opened my mind up to completely different worlds.
do you get into the fiction in the way that, like, the hidden meanings?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, what was Tolkien trying to say in that time? Like, did you get something from that? Or if you looked at
probably, it's funny, probably not on first examination, right? You sort of are entering a new world. I'm trying to imagine myself opening it for the first time, right? And, I got to The Hobbit first before
Wow.
Lord of the Rings.
I'm a huge fan, by the way.
Yeah, The Hobbit is for me a really great children's book. And because it really does discuss the themes of, I have a wonderful life over here, and it's quiet and it's simple, and I've had it forever, and it's wonderful. And all of a sudden there's chaos. I'm thrust into a completely new adventure, and I don't wilt, I flourish, and I become a whole different thing that I didn't even know I could be. That's, that's not only to Tolkien, right? Tolkien didn't invent that idea, didn't invent that thought. It's the only thought, right? It's the hero's journey. It's everything in a way that a child can digest it, right? And that was incredibly, incredibly meaningful to me.
Where are you in that journey today?
Oh, so I'm Gollum in the cave with the.
Wow. I think so. You are honest.
Where am I? I'm somewhere between Smog and, sitting on the pile of treasure. And who knows? Gimli, the drunk. I don't know. Who knows?
Very interesting, Scott. But before we move on, because I want to make sure all the Lord of the Ring fans are fully satisfied for this episode. Which is the best of the six, and why?
Yeah, for me, The Hobbit is the purest story. I think that it's self-contained. It has, for people who don't know, it has beautiful poetry and song. The illustrations, the original illustrations are gorgeous. The map of Middle Earth. There are amazing sort of chapters that are set pieces. It's sort of designed cinematically. It's sort of a shame that The Lord of the Rings was a much better movie than The Hobbit, perhaps, for most. I just think that The Hobbit sort of is a more beautiful set pieces in sort of a shorter story.
Which character are we?
Are we?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, which characters, plural.
Yeah,
who am I? Who are you?
Yeah,
come on, let's play the game.
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to do that. But what I will say, what I will say is what's interesting about
These
that,
shows are fun.
What's interesting about that story is that we're all of them, right? We're all of them. Where we
save.
are. No, but I think that was thoughtful. I don't think that's my thought. I think that, that he was thoughtful about that. I think everybody is Bilbo, right? At one point or not in the course of a day, In the course of a day, I'm comfortable. I'm faced with something to do that's an issue. I don't want to do it. I'm sort of thrust into fixing it. If I do, I'm victorious. I've done the entire Hobbit in the course of one activity. If you sort of think about it in terms of that. So, I mean, I think that I'm also, if I get something that my family's, or not family, let's say I get something that was taken from me, and I become very resentful of the people around me. I mean, you could talk about,
Gollum.
Well, there's Gollum for sure. He gets what is most precious to
His
him.
power is taken.
Can't live without it. It's the only thing that he's left with, right? He has nothing around him but that.
The leader with a title and no character.
Well, the leader.
That's
Well,
an
I would say
like
so.
the title, and not the gumption, right? It's like that's just an example of something that pops out, like the access to, it changed. The medium's different, right? Like
it's all his agency is in that ring. All of his whole life is he can't hunt without it, right? Because he has to be invisible to hunt. He's alone by himself. He's just sort of, when he's found, he's by himself on a small island, little boat, like nothing around him but cavern and water, some fish to eat. He's completely alone. And, sort of at least in the Hobbit, he's left alone because Bilbo takes the ring, uses it and escapes. You are testing my memory on I mean, I'm going deep into things I haven't thought about in a long time. I'm trying to think of character names in my head. I mean,
well, is not the book a dialogue around power, around truth? Right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I mean,
like the ring of power, right? There's that scene where they talk about in the Fellowship of the Ring, let's use it against Sauron.
Yep.
Or, let's cast it into the fires of Mount Doom.
So I would go even earlier in the movie, if you want to use the movie as a reference. When they describe how the Ring of Power is created, they made rings for the elves, for the dwarfs, for the men, but they were deceived because there was one ring that controlled them all, and that's the person who took all the power. So these are people who think that this gives them power. I have a ring, I have power, but they're deceived. And now they're powerless because one guy, Sauron, has the one ring. Now they all have to get together to defeat him. So each person who thought they had individual power, right?
Yeah.
They all had to come together to defeat the one who deceived them.
Now, where lies the deception? Is the deception that they're going to have power because of some symbol, some material, some externality that's going to give them something over other elves or other dwarves or other beings? Like, is there an idea that can't come from something external? That meaning we're equal as people. We may have different skill sets or talents, but as soon as we start thinking we're not equal, right? I'll think of it like tangibly, like as soon as I don't care what you have to say because I have the ring and you don't, that's the beginning of that self-deception.
See, I think he's saying, I would take it even further and say, I think I have power. We're all equal because we all have rings, but we have something that has power over us that if we don't join all together, I can't defeat him by myself. I can't do this by myself. It's only by maybe getting rid of an ego, right? Getting all together and saying, hey, I can't do this on my own. We have to go all together and fight Sauron, in this case, together, or we're never going to defeat this problem. That's what I think. So I think it's I think it's the coming together. That's sort of the overarching theme for that.
Okay, so the coming together, different cultures to fight this lie but where is the lie? Is the lie in that someone created something of power outside of, right, that separates?
That we didn't know.
So they each got something, but they each got a gift from someone that had power.
Yes.
See, that's an interesting thing, right? They each got a gift. It's like getting something for nothing.
Right.
But you didn't get it for nothing. You got it because you got it because you basically you lose your agency.
Right.
Like is that's part, like if you give your agency, if you accept the ring of power from Sauron, what are you giving away?
Right. Well,
I don't know. I'm curious what you think.
No, I mean,
if Sauron made this ring, gives it to everybody, or the leaders, they all get a ring. What's the ring? Title, influence, prestige, a salary, like whatever those constraints
so then
are.
from Sauron's point of view, think about it this way. I gave you guys all these rings. You all ganged up and took me out. What happened? I thought
So
you got what you wanted.
That this whole book is really
all
about how
bullshit.
he's the best.
Bullshit. From his point of view. And by the way, isn't that an interesting?
Okay, hold on. This is good. Well, but maybe, okay, so to him it's BS.
Mm-hmm.
But the question becomes, did he tell them what, here's an omission is as mendacious as a lie.
Right.
So did Sauron have to get, how many of them would have accepted the ring if Sauron had said from the beginning, here's the power, the catch is you work for me.
Right.
But he didn't tell the truth.
Right.
He gave them something, and then it slowly turned them against themselves, essentially.
Right.
I'm curious what you think of that. Like the truth, where does the truth
Yeah, I mean, I think that Tolkien sort of solves that problem by saying immediately, but they were deceived. So obviously they didn't know. They didn't know that this ring of power controlled all of the other rings. And they, now.
And the question becomes, when did he find out? Meaning Sauron was an elf at one point. I don't know if you knew he was an elf at one point.
Gotcha.
And he pursued the arts. He pursued power.
Right.
And this is like a deep, this is like, it's so interesting we end up here, but this is like foundational in everything culture matters. Like, at what point does the honest liar become the liar?
Right.
The honest liar is honest in public, but lies themselves. That's essentially all humans. However, in position of power, like, for example, with an equity, if I'm ultimately accountable to the equity,
yep,
all responsibility falls on my shoulders. How am I going to burden that? So Sauron was an elf, and if he deceived them, my question is, when did his self-deception become deception?
Right. Yeah, I mean, what triggers that, right? I mean, when is it sort of the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Is that it's one good decision, you think you're doing the right thing every time, and it's sort of taking you down a dark path. You thought you're doing right, and then by the time you figured out you're doing wrong, you're too far into it. That's an interesting thought. And that I don't know enough about. There are books that discuss before writings. Tolkien wrote a lot of the sort of the history of.
Why did the, here, how about this? Why did the elves and the dwarves and the humans coming together? Why were they able to beat Sauron, who had the ring of power at the time?
Right.
Why do you think?
I think, mechanically, I can't tell you. I think as a story, as the storyteller, you're going to want to tell the story of We didn't think we could do it. Against all odds, competing forces came together for a common good. And they're in story, they're bound to prevail. That's all that's sort of the language of narrative.
Why though? Like,
well,
why?
I think there's a need, at least in a narrative, to have a satisfactory answer. Because if the story was everybody spent the entirety of 3 books coming together, and we've amassed this giant army, which was, everybody who hated each other a week ago, and we're about to face the greatest evil there ever was, and wouldn't you know it, he won. Turns out he was a bigger bastard all along. That's, very few stories sort of have that trajectory. Because it teaches you, it almost sort of goes against your DNA of how a story should
so
go.
truth beats falsehood. However, we have to be able to pursue truth. And to do that, we have to be able to work with those that we don't like or don't agree with.
Yeah, I think that's every day, right? Every single thing you face, if you face it with people, to overcome, you're always going to be better. The big problem, big group of people, a lot of ideas, a lot of experience, instead of sort of, just trying to face it on your own, knowing you can't.
So Sauron wanted this totalitarian control over all people. And he lost. Why?
Well, because the will of the people is greater than the will of one.
What can we use today in this, this marketplace, this time?
Yeah.
Drawing from these stories to win.
I would say as a leader, it's understanding that, that very same thing, that drawing from everybody's experience is oftentimes way more valuable than, me lording over my team members with the one true way of doing things. You have to be nimble. You have to be able to sort of see what's in front of you. And ultimately, you're right from the beginning of this conversation. It does rest solely on my shoulders. It's my name on the wall. It's your name on the wall. And I care more about it myself than they could ever care. Right? As passionate as somebody is, as an employee is, they're never going to be as passionate as I am for 1,000 different reasons. But understanding that, I don't have the one true secret. It's in a lot of situations, taking from other people's experience, good people, surrounding yourself with great people that have great ideas. That's how you defeat Sauron. That's how you go through life.